Evenings have always been my favorite time of day, that fragile hour when the world finally slows down and the noise outside fades into a soft hum. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in my old gray blanket, laptop glowing on my knees. The lavender candle flickered beside me, filling the room with a scent that used to calm me when Ryan was away. But that night, it only made the silence feel heavier. He'd been gone 3 days on a business trip in Chicago, but lately, every conversation between us felt like small talk with a stranger. Still, I smiled as I clicked his name. Part hope, part habit. Maybe I was just being dramatic. Every marriage had its quiet phases, right? The screen connected, and there he was. Ryan, shirtless, grinning, his hair slightly messy. "Hey, stranger," I said, teasing, trying to sound playful instead of desperate for connection. He laughed, rubbing his neck, telling me he'd just stepped out of the shower. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that grin meant something more than guilt or distraction. We chatted like we always did, light, ordinary, safe. He complained about long meetings, about boring presentations. I nodded, smiling when I should, pretending the distance between us wasn't growing wider. But then I saw it. In the mirror behind him. A flicker. Just for a second. A shape that didn't belong. My breath caught, my chest tightening before I could even make sense of it. "Are you alone, Rye?" I asked, my voice soft, too controlled. He didn't even blink before saying, "Of course. Who else would be here?" I laughed, or at least I tried to. It came out too high, too sharp. I thought I saw someone in the mirror," I said, pretending it was a joke, like I wasn't staring straight at the reflection behind him. Ryan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Probably the maid," he said, voice smooth but rushed. "She just dropped off towels." Towels. Right. I nodded, though we both knew hotel staff don't walk in during video calls. His lie came too fast, too easy, like a reflex he'd practiced. As he talked about dinner plans and deadlines, I barely heard him. My mind was still on that quick flash, the curve of a shoulder, the movement of hair, something unmistakably feminine. My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my face still, my voice calm. Years of marriage had taught me that women like me don't scream when they're suspicious. We observe, we collect details, we wait. He smiled again, looking so normal, so ordinary. But I could feel the space between us turning into a quiet battlefield neither of us wanted to admit existed. When we finally said goodnight, I stared at the black screen for a long time after his face disappeared. The reflection in my own laptop caught me, eyes wide, jaw tight. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Somewhere inside, I knew the truth had just slipped through the cracks, but part of me still wanted to cling to denial. I told myself I'd sleep on it, let it go. But deep down, I already knew. That mirror hadn't lied. I closed the laptop gently, as if shutting it too hard might make the truth spill out. The house felt colder, though nothing had changed except what I now knew. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the wall clock, sounds that suddenly felt louder than they should. My pulse was still racing, my palms damp. It wasn't just jealousy, it was recognition. I'd seen that kind of quick lie before, the kind that slips out before the brain catches up. My mind wandered through old memories, moments when his phone buzzed and he'd turn it face down, when his trip started lasting longer, when "I love you" began sounding like a routine instead of a promise. It was all there. I just hadn't wanted to connect the dots. Denial, I realized, is softer than the truth, easier to hold. But once it breaks, there's no way to unsee what's been reflected back at you. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the call in my head, his tone, his laugh, the mirror. That damned mirror. I didn't know it yet, but that reflection would change everything. By morning, the image of that woman behind him would no longer just be a blur. It would become proof. The next morning, the house still smelled like coffee and betrayal. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, staring at the frozen image from last night's call. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, hesitant, as if pressing play would make it official. But curiosity and pain are twins. Once one moves, the other follows. I hit play, and there it was. Ryan smiling at me, pretending everything was normal, while in the mirror behind him, a flash of red moved across the frame. I paused it, rewound, played it again. This time I watched the reflection, not him. A woman, in a red robe, walked behind him. She reached for something on the bed, her movements calm, familiar. My breath hitched, but my body didn't move. On the nightstand, 2 glasses of wine glimmered under the lamplight. 2. Not 1. My stomach twisted, but my hands were steady. I took screenshots. Not for revenge yet. Not even for clarity. Just for truth. I needed to see it, hold it, name it. Every frame felt like a confession he hadn't given me permission to hear. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, until the mirror became a witness I could almost question. Blonde hair, bare shoulder, soft light. My pulse was slow now, not from panic, but from focus. Because when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't scream. It whispers. I sat there for a long time, staring at that still frame. My reflection ghosted faintly over it. 2 women in one screen. One who believed him, and one who never would again. Somewhere between those screenshots, I stopped shaking. There's a strange calm that comes after the shock fades, when the heart catches up to what the eyes already know. I wasn't angry yet. Anger needs words, movement, sound. What I felt was quieter, like glass settling after it shatters. I picked up my phone and called the hotel. My voice sounded unfamiliar, polite, careful, like someone placing an order instead of confronting her husband's lie. "Hi, I'm trying to reach Mr. Ryan Bennett's room," I said. "He's staying there for a business conference." The receptionist hesitated, checked something, then replied, "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Bennett is with us, but he requested not to receive calls. He and his guest are resting." Guest. Just one word. But it echoed so loudly in my head, I could barely hear anything else. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall. The lavender scent from last night had turned sour in my nose. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but my lips curved into a small, bitter smile. He wasn't even smart enough to hide it properly. That somehow hurt the most. Not just that he betrayed me, but that he thought I'd never see it. I should have cried. That's what I expected from myself. Tears, maybe anger, maybe the urge to throw something across the room. But none of that came. Instead, I sat there, calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. My breathing slowed. My thoughts grew sharp. The shock had burned away, leaving behind something steadier. Resolve. Every detail of that call, every word he'd said, every flicker in that mirror was now cataloged in my mind. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a witness. I replayed our last few weeks together, searching for the signs that had slipped past me. The sudden late meetings, the distracted kisses, the way he'd started calling me Han instead of love. I'd mistaken habit for affection, routine for intimacy. Maybe we both had. But I wasn't going to be the fool in his story, not the woman who finds out and breaks down. No. I'd play the long game, quiet and precise. He wouldn't even see it coming. That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the glass. My reflection stared back. Not broken, not weak, just different. There was a new kind of silence in me, the kind that doesn't beg for answers because it already has them. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'll start planning. If he wants to lie through mirrors, I'll make sure one reflects the truth right back at him. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I finally could think. The air felt different, lighter somehow, like the moment after a storm when everything still smells like rain. I brewed my coffee, answered a few work emails, smiled at the neighbor when I took out the trash. I played my part perfectly. If Ryan could lie with a straight face, so could I. My phone buzzed, a message from him. "Morning, babe. Meetings all day. Miss you." I smiled at the screen, typing back, "Hope you slept well. Can't wait to hear all about your trip." He replied hours later, as if from another world. "Miss you too. Back home Friday night. Maybe we'll do dinner?" I stared at his message for a while, the words almost laughable. Dinner. The simplicity of it made me sick and amused all at once. He really thought this was still a marriage. But to me, it had already become a transaction, one that was about to close. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Insurance, attached the screenshots, and forwarded them to my attorney. The prenup had been his idea back then. "To protect us both," he said. Irony has a cruel sense of humor. I had agreed to the clause that voided shared assets in case of infidelity. He'd signed it easily, never imagining it would turn against him. As I pressed send, I felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not satisfaction. Something cleaner, like balance being restored. By noon, my plan had taken shape. Not born from rage, but from precision. I didn't want to humiliate him, not yet. I wanted the truth to dismantle his lies one layer at a time, the same way he'd peeled trust away from me. So I called his business partner, Tom. My voice was light, casual, the kind you use when you already know the answer. "Hey, Tom, just wanted to make sure Ryan got there safely," I said, stirring my coffee like it wasn't boiling in my hand. There was a pause, then confusion. "Got where? He's been working from home all week. Didn't he tell you?" That was the moment the last thread snapped. Quietly, cleanly. I smiled at nothing, just letting the silence stretch before thanking him. The kind of silence that hides power. When I hung up, I sat for a moment, staring out the window at the world continuing as if mine hadn't just split open. But this time, I didn't feel small inside it. I felt prepared. Everything was aligning, just as it should. Lies, evidence, timing, all neat and in place. I drafted an email to my attorney, forwarding the call notes and the screenshots again, labeled neatly, "Supporting proof." My cursor blinked on the screen, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to heartbreak. Ryan thought he'd hidden everything in distance and darkness, but he forgot the one thing mirrors always do. They reflect. And this time, they were reflecting him right into my hands. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, not to numb anything, but to mark a moment. The beginning of the end. The living room lights were dim, the candlelight soft and steady. It felt almost ceremonial. My phone buzzed again, Ryan texting heart emojis, telling me he couldn't wait to be home. I smiled faintly. I'd once waited for his returns like a child waiting for summer. Now I was counting down the days to watch him walk into his own undoing. Every detail had been set in motion. The lawyer, the documents, the timing. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of pain. It was about reclaiming the balance he'd shattered. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted him aware, to feel the weight of his choices pressing down, to look in the mirror and finally see what I saw. That's what justice looked like to me now. Quiet, precise, inevitable. Before going to bed, I opened the screenshots one last time, studying the reflection behind him. That woman in red, she wasn't my enemy. She was proof. Proof that I'd been living beside a man who smiled while dismantling trust one lie at a time. When I closed my laptop, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt ready. By Friday night, he'd come home to a wife he no longer recognized. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally stopped pretending. Friday night arrived like a deadline I'd written in ink. The house was spotless, not out of habit, but preparation. I wanted nothing out of place when the truth finally stepped through the door. At 7 sharp, I heard the familiar sound of his keys, the creak of the door, the same soft hum he always made when he thought I wasn't listening. "Missed you, babe," he said, voice smooth, suitcase dropping to the floor. I turned, smiling, not cold, not kind, just still. "Did you?" He crossed the room, leaned in to kiss my cheek. The scent of hotel soap lingered on him. Something foreign, something wrong. "Of course," he said easily. "You okay?" I nodded, motioning to the couch. "Yeah. I actually wanted to show you something." My tone was light, practiced. He didn't suspect a thing. He never did. I opened my laptop, my fingers steady, and pulled up the video call, frozen on the frame that had changed everything. The reflection glimmered on the screen. That mirror, that woman, that lie caught mid-motion. I hit play. He froze. His breath caught, the color draining from his face as the scene unfolded again in perfect silence between us. "Camilla," he stammered. "It's not what you think." But I'd already stopped listening. Because for once, I wasn't here to believe him. I was here to make him watch himself lie. He stood there, lips parting and closing again, searching for words that could rewrite reality. "Camilla, please, just listen," he said, his voice trembling with that practiced sincerity I'd once mistaken for love. "It was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I let out a quiet laugh. Not cruel, but empty. The sound of disbelief long gone stale. "Strange," I said softly, tilting my head. "Because it looked meaningful enough for 2 glasses of wine and a night in a hotel you didn't travel to for work." He blinked, realizing too late that I knew everything. "Please," he whispered, stepping closer. "Let's talk about this." I met his eyes, the same eyes that once made me feel safe, and all I saw was a stranger rehearsing regret. "I did talk, Ryan," I said quietly. "You just weren't listening." I reached for the envelope I'd placed on the coffee table hours earlier. My fingers didn't shake. I'd rehearsed this in my head 1,000 times. I handed it to him. Crisp, white, simple. Divorce papers. He looked down at them like they might burn. "Camila," he started, but I didn't let him finish. "Sign them," I said, calm as breath. "You already gave me everything I needed. Proof and peace." He stood frozen, his mouth half open, but no words came. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was final. He just stood there, holding the papers like they were written in a language he couldn't read. His mouth moved, but his voice never came. I watched him the way you watch the last flicker of a dying flame. Curious, detached, almost grateful it's finally over. I felt no rage, no sadness, just an unfamiliar quiet inside me. It was peace, but the kind that comes after the storm has already torn everything apart. "You can leave them signed on the counter," I said softly. "There's a pen next to the truth you tried to hide." He looked at me then, really looked, like maybe for the first time, he was seeing the woman who'd stood beside him all these years. "Camilla, I made a mistake," he said, voice cracking. "You're throwing everything away." I smiled faintly. "No, Ryan. You did that already. I'm just finishing what you started." The sound of my own voice surprised me. Calm, low, absolute. There was no tremor left to betray me. I followed him to the door as he gathered his things, fumbling with zippers, avoiding my eyes. "I hope she was worth it," I said quietly, not as a curse, but as a statement of fact. He stopped for a moment, like he might turn back, but he didn't. The door closed behind him, and the echo lingered. Soft, clean, final. I stood there in the silence he left behind, knowing that peace wasn't just something you find. Sometimes it's something you create. He came back the next morning, eyes hollow, hair disheveled, the kind of broken that comes from realizing consequences can't be undone. He'd signed the papers. I could tell by the faint smudge of ink on his fingers. "You win," he said quietly, like this had been a game. I looked at him for a moment, the man who once promised forever and couldn't even keep the truth for a week. "This isn't about winning," I said softly. "It's about ending what you ruined." He tried to speak, to negotiate, but I was already past the point of caring. The woman who begged for explanations was gone. I picked up the envelope from the counter and slipped it into my bag. "You should check your email," I said, almost casually. He frowned, confused. "Why?" I met his eyes. Steady, calm, merciless. "Because your boss has a copy of your little business trip. Turns out lying to your wife is one thing. Lying on company time is another." His face drained of color. "You didn't—" "I did," I said, cutting him off. "You told me you were in Chicago. You weren't. You told your company you were working. You weren't. Actions have reflections, Ryan. You just didn't like what yours showed." He stared at me, lost between anger and disbelief. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to gloat. Silence did the work for me. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I didn't flinch. The sound felt symbolic. The last violent echo of a man who couldn't control the narrative anymore. I stood in the quiet, watching the door settle back into its frame. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the weight of his lies pressing against my chest. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was simply free. It was such a strange, unfamiliar peace that I almost didn't trust it. A few hours later, I checked my phone. A new email from his company had arrived. Short, formal, precise. "Thank you for your cooperation. The matter has been addressed." That was it. No details, no drama. But I could imagine the look on his face when they confronted him. The shock, the stammering, the unraveling. I didn't need to see it to know. His downfall wasn't loud, it was administrative, clean, efficient. The kind of justice paperwork delivers better than rage ever could. I poured myself another glass of wine, standing by the window as dusk settled over the neighborhood. The world looked different now, clearer somehow. I thought of the mirror again, of that reflection that had once shattered my heart. Funny how something so small could expose so much. He used that mirror to hide his truth. I used it to find mine. By nightfall, the house felt different. Not empty. Just mine again. His clothes were gone. His cologne no longer lingered in the air. And the silence that once felt unbearable now wrapped around me like protection. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the dining table, the cool surface of the kitchen counter. Every space carried a memory, but they no longer hurt. They just existed, like old photographs you can finally look at without crying. I sat on the couch, the same spot where I'd once called him, where everything had started to fall apart. I thought about how strange it was, the way life can pivot on something as small as a reflection. If that mirror hadn't been behind him, maybe I'd still be living inside his lie. Maybe that's the cruel mercy of truth. It shows up when you least expect it, but exactly when you need it most. I didn't text him again. I didn't need to. He'd see my silence everywhere. In the missing ring, the emptied drawers, the locked bank accounts. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was balanced. He taught me deception. I taught him consequence. And in the end, I didn't just take back my freedom. I took back the reflection he tried to distort. Months passed before I realized how different peace feels when it's real. Not the temporary calm that comes between arguments, but the kind that hums quietly inside you, asking for nothing. I was sitting at a seaside cafe, sunlight spilling through the glass. My laptop open to a blank page. No screenshots, no evidence, no ghosts. The ocean shimmered beyond the window, waves curling and breaking like they'd been waiting for me to notice them again. I smiled without thinking, the kind of smile that doesn't perform. It just happens. My best friend called, her face lighting up the screen. "You look different," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Happier." I laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I stopped staring into mirrors that showed someone else's lies," I told her. She nodded, the kind of understanding only women who've rebuilt themselves can share. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't explaining my pain. I was living past it. As we talked, I caught my reflection faintly in the window. Sunlight, salt air, calm eyes. No distortion, no shadow behind me. Just me. The woman who once searched for answers in other people's truths had finally found her own. I lifted my cup toward the sea, a quiet toast to survival, and whispered. In the end, his reflection betrayed him. Mine set me free.